Welcome everyone to the Career Exploration Workshop on non-faculty careers in higher education. As a reminder, this is one of the thrusts of career pathways is to help graduate students think about and explore different career paths that you might not necessarily have thought about. And what I really want to emphasize to our students is really thinking about the graduate education that you're currently pursuing doesn't necessarily kind of push you in one a specific career path, but really kind of gives you a range of skills and a range of knowledge to really allow you to be very flexible and consider a wide range of career paths. And really, with career exploration, my hope is that you'll be able to hear from different people about their different career paths, and maybe one of those might really resonate with you, and know that that's a way for you to think about how you can leverage your graduate education right now. Things that you're doing in the classroom, things that you're doing as part of your graduate assistantship or projects for class that can really help you think about leveraging all of that for the next step. So if you have not already learned or heard about career pathways, I just want to remind you that it is a university-wide career and professional development program specifically for graduate students. And it's really intended to help graduate students think about life beyond graduate school. I know graduate school itself can be very encompassing, but just kind of keeping in mind that there is life beyond graduate school and that you're in graduate school for a very specific purpose. And so how do we connect what you're doing now to that career path post-graduate school? And that's really the thrust and the emphasis of career pathways. We have the Preparing Future Faculty certificate that helps faculty who are interested in a career in the academy to be a professor just like me. But we also have the Preparing Future Professionals certificate that's much more flexible and really tailored to the specific interests and kind of career ideas that the graduate students are pursuing. So just keep those in mind. I'd love to see more of you at our Career Pathways events in the future. But today we're going to talk about non-faculty careers in higher education. And I'm so pleased to have four panelists who will be able to share with you kind of the wide-ranging paths, uh, things that they've done to get to them to where they are today. I'm hoping that they'll share the good, the bad, the I wish I thought about this 5 years, 6 years ago, or at the beginning of my, graduate school career. But really, I'm hoping that you'll get from these panelists, really some insights into what it is that they love about working in higher education, and hopefully also if this is something that you're interested in, what can you start thinking about and what can you start doing to help develop what could be beneficial for that particular career path? So I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves, and I'm also going to give them time to really just talk about their career path, and then maybe highlight some of the things that they really wanted to share with graduate students. So we're going to start with Fred, and then we'll go to, just to prime everybody, then I'm going to go to Liz, Remica, and Susan will get to wrap us up. So Fred, please kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Youssef. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us, whether you're live or watching this recording. Very appreciative and privileged to join this important conversation, especially as we tend to forget in the larger enterprise about the graduate student experience and how important they are through really critical transitions. Speaking of transitions, ODU was actually the place that got me into a career in higher education. I am a first generation college student born to two Filipino immigrants. So I'm a second generation American. I grew up right here in Ocean View in Norfolk. And I was a commuter student as an undergraduate student here at Old Dominion University. And so although my career, I've as a first gen student, there was a lot that I did not know about the college experience. I came to ODU as a institution that had great financial aid and access for me as a first gen low income student. And so ODU really became a great place for me. I will say as an undergraduate student, I was very fortunate to be taken in by many mentors, of which I now work with today and have had the pleasure to continue leading our great division. And I currently serve as Chief of Staff for the Division of Student Enrollment, Engagement, and Services, really where I have an opportunity to lead our strategy and culture to get, keep, and graduate monarchs. And that includes our graduate students in that work as well. As an undergraduate student, I was part of many mentoring programs that were really critical to me discovering a little bit about higher education. Probably like many of my other panelists, they didn't think they would be working in the graduate school or with accreditation or as a chief of staff in higher education. So that was new for me. And I changed my major a lot as I was trying to discover and figure out like, what exactly would this look like? For me, as an undergraduate student, not only mentoring, professional association work, and connections with graduate faculty really helped me in a really critical and transition time into my master's degree. I got my master's degree in counseling from Clemson University, and really had a great experience there. I think for me, as I was looking at graduate education, I really knew that I needed the strong sense of belonging that I had at ODU, and that would really provide me some of those foundational things from both mentoring and sense of belonging to be successful. And I found that during my interview weekend at Clemson University, and that really allowed me to thrive there. From there, I went to work full-time in the field as the director of student activities at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. And so my background really working at ODU and then having 2 years working in housing at Clemson University allowed me to have the experience to step into this leadership role at North Carolina's public liberal arts university, UNC Asheville, which was a wonderful 4 years there. I will tell you, as I was looking for that first job post my master's degree, I was really looking to what Dr. Youssef said. What were some of those motivations? For me, I wanted to be in an inclusive community, and so that was really important to me. Western North Carolina and Asheville is a wonderful place if you've never visited it. It's a wonderful, inclusive, and progressive space in North Carolina. But number two, I also had the opportunity to get back into the work that I really wanted to be in, which was working to create that sense of belonging for students. So in that role as the director of student activities, I had the privilege of directing our student center, all of our student activities, including our clubs, organizations, fraternities, sororities, our student employment program, all things that were so foundational for me. As a small liberal arts institution, we did go through some financial hardships, and I also, as someone that was itching to get back in the classroom as a lifelong learner, I wanted to start my doctoral work. And so, as liberal arts universities don't tend to have many doctoral programs and graduate degrees, and so I had the opportunity to come back to Virginia a little bit closer to home, where I served as the director of student leadership engagement at Virginia. That was a great opportunity to take the work that I loved, bring it to scale, support a population that was very similar to ODU. VC is also a minority serving institution. So there was a lot of things that felt really good about that move. And I will say, VCU being a much larger institution, I had the opportunity to work with many student success professionals to start thinking about what could my next step be as I was going through my graduate education and my EDD program in higher education. I will tell you, as a doctoral student, I had this really profound shift from a faculty member. In my second semester, second year, I submitted a paper at 11:57 p.m. And one of my faculty members, who ended up being my doctoral capstone advisor, said, "Please meet me in the courtyard tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp." And Dr. Tamika Ferguson, who she knows I love telling this story, she said, "I need you to stop writing like a student and start writing like a scholar." And that for me was one of those come to Jesus moments that was a really intrusive advisor moment, right? We talk about that sense of belonging, that mentorship, that sort of thing. For me, I was a full-time working professional working on my doc work on the side, but I needed that coaching from a faculty member to help me realize that what she was really saying is that if you want to earn this doctorate and hold this title that I also have, that I'm going to need you to start thinking a little bit more critically about this work and don't give me a dumpster fire, which is essentially what she said. And so I hope that those faculty relationships really blossom for you as well. When I got my doctorate, I had the opportunity to transition into Dean of Students work, so really working on student care, conduct, and crisis support, and did that at VCU during my 5 years in total there. And then an opportunity came back to come back home to Old Dominion University in the summer of 2022, where I was Associate Dean of Students doing very similar work, and then into Chief of Staff work, where now I'm leading our employee experience as part of our division, as well as our strategic plan implementation. So all that to say that for a lot of us, we have personal stories as to why we do this work. For me, I really enjoy being in public higher education. I was a first-gen low-income student, and ODU provided so many open doors for me to be successful. So I created those opportunities along the way and in housing, in student activities, into the Dean of Students work, where we're helping students through the best and worst of their times in their journey, and now being able to do that in a place that means a lot to me. So that's my journey. I've been in this profession and really in student engagement work and student affairs work for a better half of a decade. And I'm happy to answer any questions as we get through our introductions.
Thank you, Fred. I'm going to hand it off to Liz for her to share.
So no questions now? I can't ask Fred questions. I should just do my
We'll
thing,
save the questions for
and then
the
we'll
end.
say that. Okay, because I have questions, Fred. Great. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And it's just been a great opportunity to reflect on my career, which I'm kind of at the other end of my career as Fred is. I've been my name is Liz Smith. I am in the graduate school, which is in the Division of Academic Affairs. My title is Director of Interdisciplinary Initiatives, and I'm a project manager in the Integration Management Office. And I've been in this current role for about 10 years, the last 3 full-time on the integration. But I've been at ODU much, much longer, since the 90s. So I'm breaking up this little summary into my 3 eras. Thank you, and many accolades to Taylor Swift as I talk about my eras, and I hope she's not insulted. I am a scientist, first and foremost. That's my lens. That's what I feel I bring. Part of my brand, if you like. I'm not sure exactly what a personal brand is, but that would be it for me. I have a master's and a bachelor's in oceanography from big R1 Southeastern universities. Fred, sorry to say that I loved you until Clemson part, but I am a Gamecock. And so we'll have to work that out. I had a lot of great opportunities as an undergraduate to do research. And so, of course, I was going to graduate school. And my master's experience was not what I had hoped it would be. And there were many reasons for that. There were things that I did not do, questions I did not ask. And also I was in a very male-dominated field in the early 80s. And I think my advisor wasn't sure what to do with me and couldn't understand why I wasn't a business major. So we had to work through that. So very determined to finish my master's degree, because I was going to have a master's degree in physical oceanography. But continuing with research was not what I was going to do. I needed to look at other opportunities. So that was my first little bit of a divergence from strictly academic work. I love to be around the science. That was very important to me. So I finished my master's, and my first job after my master's was as a member of the technical staff at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. JPL is the they do uncrewed or unmanned planetary and space exploration. So JPL sends the probes, not the people. And I joined the oceanography group, which was developing instrumentation to measure properties of the ocean from space. And I worked a lot on their data systems. So built up my skills in the science and the data science. We didn't call it that at the time. We were just, analysts. I loved my time at JPL. So why did I leave there? Because as life happens, I fell in love with another oceanographer who is still my husband now, who did have very strong feelings about being in the academy. And that's what he really wanted to do, was to be a tenure track professor, a tenured professor. When he got the offer to come to ODU, I was happy enough to move back to the East Coast because my family all was here and I was tired of LA. And I knew I could do something. I wasn't sure what. And a lot of this is to say, maybe I didn't plan as well as I wasn't as intentional as I could have been. So I became the trailing spouse here at ODU. The department chair who hired my husband realized that his happiness and success was probably tied to mine. And he was very motivated to help me figure out a path at ODU. And this is where, and Fred mentioned mentorship, this is where the mentorship kicked in for me at this point. And he helped me to develop a very small research program, leveraging the work that I had done at JPL. And the oceanography department was very welcoming. And even though I didn't have the terminal degree, the oceanography department they were interested in working with me. And so I did that for several years, small projects, not all self-funded. I did contract work for NOAA. I ran a competition for high school kids about oceanography. I did a lot of different things, all in the science realm. I loved being around it. I wanted to be a science person. So that was always what I looked for. All right, so I told you about my rocket science era. I told you about my research era. So in the research era, the skills that I gained there were writing proposals, managing small grants, just navigating that whole research development and implementation process. So that was a critical skill that helped me later. Let's see. So, also during this research era, I was greatly privileged to be able to do this. I was not the primary breadwinner of the family, and I had two tiny people I was taking care of at that time. And so I rarely worked full-time. I was rarely funded full-time. And I was able to do that because of my circumstances and my situation, which came from a lot of privilege and just being fortunate that the chips fell where they did. So it was during that time that I helped the department and the university organize around climate change and sea level rise, and Dr. Youssef was part of this initiative as well. And this was one of ODU's early forays into really saying we're going to invest in interdisciplinary things. So in 2014, I applied for a new position called Administrator for Interdisciplinary Initiatives, and I got that position, and that's what I've been doing ever since. I have, and this is where I have learned about the academic enterprise, how to develop curriculum. I contributed to establishing the cybersecurity major and the center, and bringing faculty together around cybersecurity, and just so that skill of convening and facilitating has always been an important one. And communication. Let's see. Right. So that brings me to 2022, when I was asked by a vice provost if I would be interested in being on the project management team for the integration. And usually, you know, you say yes when a vice provost asks you to think about doing something. And I think that's also something throughout my career that I have done, and maybe too much so, but it's allowed me to explore a lot of different things, to just say yes, think about doing this, especially when my mentor would say, you know, you would be good at this, why don't you think about applying for it? And he was usually right about that. Yeah, I have loved being at ODU. So as I said, I think I would be a little more intentional about things to do over again, but thank you.
Thank you, Liz. All right, Remica, try to top the Eras tour here.
Right. I mean, who knew? Well, listen, if we're doing Taylor, you know, I'm a poet, so we into the poets that come on. All right, anyway. So thank you so much. I heard Fred say Dr. Youssef, and I forget to call we Dr. Youssef because I call her we rock star, because she's a rock star in kind of every room. So thank you for having us. I'm gonna set my little timer so we talk for the time that we're supposed to, and then we can have this open, broader conversation. And so it's so interesting hearing people's journeys, because we never get to talk about this stuff. So it's nice to kind of see that we've all jumped around quite a bit. My story is going to start in the same place that Fred's did. You know, I came to ODU as an undergrad, first gen, with absolutely no idea what to expect. I jumped around a lot in undergrad too, but eventually landed on English with creative writing and African American studies as my minors. And when I left ODU, I left at the suggestion, you know, I graduated early. And at the suggestion of Tim Siebels, who I had kind of stalked and made my way onto his advisees list before I left in undergrad, because I by then had dreams of being a writer. He said, listen, you've got all these family responsibilities. Have you thought about a low res program, a low res creative writing MFA? The MFA was a terminal degree. And the low res program was you got to go up for 10 days at a time. And the rest of the time you were doing, believe it or not, it was still mailed correspondence with the faculty. And that ended up being the perfect spot for me. So I went to Bennington in Vermont to pursue the MFA. And I was still here helping to take care of my grandmother who passed right after I finished the MFA. So it was an important time for me to kind of balance and to understand that work-life balance, sometimes you have to think about in the midst of things, not after things. So that's something I'd encourage you all to think about too. And so as I pursued the MFA, it was in writing and literature. And because it was a creative writing degree, my thesis was creative. So it ended up being my first book that was published not long after I left the MFA program. And so after I left the MFA, I literally, and here's something for you all to think about, you know, everyone was thinking about tenure track jobs in writing. Even now, this is something we don't talk about enough for students, but for MFA programs, they have now flourished. We're graduating something like 300 to 600 MFA students a year all over the country. And last year, I believe there were 37 creative writing tenure track jobs that were released onto the market. So as you can imagine, for most of us, that was not going to be the place where we landed right away. And I, in my desperation after completing the MFA, just started Googling any job with writing in the title. I knew I wanted to stay in the area because, like I said, I was helping take care of my grandmother who was, getting kind of sicker by the day. I loved Norfolk. So this was an area that if there was a chance that I could stay in the area, I was excited to do so. And I happened to find a job that said Writing Competency Coordinator at Norfolk State University. I knew writing, had no idea what a competency coordinator was, but I knew that I would try to coordinate and be competent. So I decided to apply for that job. And it turns out that job was running a large exit writing exam. We remember when we had one here at ODU, it was kind of the way of the movement that seniors would have to take one large writing exam before they graduated from a program. We now understand that that's probably not the best way to assess student writing and understanding. So we've moved away from that model. But for a long time, that was what I did. Every single student who came through Norfolk State, I was the one that administered that exam, and every student who did not pass, I met with them one-on-one in my office to kind of help them through that process, which did two things. I started teaching adjunct at ODU at the same time because ODU had a creative writing program, and I was getting the teaching bug from meeting one-on-one with these students. So teaching and that desire didn't necessarily go away, but it was something that I knew it would have to be tucked into kind of a different part of my professional journey. And so I stayed at Norfolk State for 7 years. Being in that position as the writing competency coordinator, it was tucked under the assessment office for the university. And right now at ODU, I'm the director of the Quality Enhancement Plan initiatives that's tucked under where, you guessed it, the assessment office at Old Dominion. And so I knew very little about university assessment, about how important it was to accreditation, about why it was something that kind of drove many of the programs that were established at the university. So by just looking for something with writing in the title, I got exposure to a whole nother area that I would not have thought I had a place that would fit. And so while I was doing that work as a faculty administrator, I was not tenure track at Norfolk State. Someone sent me the position for the QEP director at Old Dominion University. I was not looking for a job. I was very happy where I was. And someone who knew me, a good mentor and friend, said, listen, this looks kind of perfect for you. So maybe you should give it a look, even if you're not particularly interested in moving. Now, I did love ODU deeply. My experience here was an exciting and fruitful one. I cannot necessarily say the same for some of my time at Bennington. It was a very isolated experience for me. It was a really white institution. It was a tiny program. So I felt out of place there in many ways, but I loved ODU. And so I kind of jumped at the chance that if there was a possibility for me to come back and be here, that I would do that. And so I ended up applying for that position, got the QEP director position, and started implementing a program here that helped faculty integrate writing into their upper division courses. We were phasing out the writing exam at ODU that I had all this experience in, and helping faculty think about different ways to help students integrate and learn writing and critical thinking skills. And so that fed my teaching bug. It also helped me use all of the experience that I had, garnered in institutional effectiveness and assessment, and helped me build a program from the ground up, which I hadn't been able to do up until that point. And so for me, being at ODU was a fantastic experience, but being a faculty administrator was even more useful to my professional and personal life, because had I been in a tenure track job, I know that I would not have been as productive as I was creatively. So I went to school to become a writer. And so when I'm teaching, I seem to find that teaching is a wonderful job, but a job that I could never turn off. I take my students home. I go to sleep thinking about them. I wake up thinking about them. It's really difficult unless it's the summer or downtime for me to write. In my faculty administrator position, at 5 o'clock, I turn the lights off in my office. I go home. I get to feed my kids, now play with my grandkids. I have time to write, time to read, time to think. And at 8 a.m. the next morning, I turn it back on. This is not something that I would have imagined was imperative for me when I started my journey, but it turns out it has been. So I really want you guys to consider, if you really love the environment of higher ed, if you're part of the nerd herd like us who never left college because you just love the learning environment, thinking about different ways to enter and be a part of that space might be best for you. And so because I've been able to have positions that allowed me to still do research, allowed me to teach adjunct at times and think about ways to build on that, I've published 5 books. My 5th book came out this year. And I've been able to still feed that fire that sent me to universities in the first place and build out some skills well beyond it. So I think maybe I'll stop there and we'll continue the conversation a little bit beyond. Thanks, guys.
So I am definitely part of the nerd herd. I might actually be part of like
Woo-hoo.
the leading of the nerd herd. But we'll let Susan wrap up this part of our conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been really interesting hearing my colleagues' stories, and I'm not sure. Dr. Youssef, I might fight you for lead of the nerd herd because hopefully my story will share that. As Liz said, it was very interesting to reflect back upon the path that got me where I am. Today, I currently serve as AVP for Strategic Operations, and I also am Chief of Staff within the Division of Digital Transformation and Technology here at ODU. I've had that title for just a couple months when I recently inherited the university data team under me again, and so my title changed slightly, but I've been serving as Chief of Staff for the past 2 years now. So I've been at ODU for 14 all told, and I was in an interesting journey, and I have loved every step of it, although I will agree with Liz that it was not always intentional, but I'm going to try and sell that as a positive. So I have an undergraduate degree in English from JMU. I loved English in high school and didn't know what else to do. So I went to JMU. I will say that was my first mentor, somebody I really just cottoned to. I don't know that he encouraged me that much, but I just enjoyed him and his teaching. And so with an undergraduate degree in English, I thought, what am I going to do? So I applied for graduate school. It was the time when I got into Penn State, and I enjoyed my 2 years there. And I really thought that, and my mentor had been, was faculty. I mean, he was teaching at JMU, and he was working on his PhD, and I believe he was an instructor at the time, but I believe he was looking to get into a tenure track position. And so that was kind of what I was focusing on. And I was in my first semester. I can still see where I was sitting in the room in the class where this happened. And this is a number of years ago. But I'm in this, it's 501, and it was the basic research methods class. And the faculty member who was teaching the class was just so focused on this concept, which I'm sure still is out there today, but of publish or perish. And I just couldn't wrap my brain around that kind of pressure, that my job and my competence would be tied to somebody saying that they wanted to publish what I wrote. You know, it seemed like it was taking away from me this sense of like, I've done good work, just can't get it published. So I found that to be very unnerving. And so I finished my 2 years and decided to move on. So however, this is the days before Starbucks, so I couldn't just go be an overqualified barista. So my version of that was to become wait staff. And so actually I was living here in Norfolk because it seems like at some point we all connected here before we were here permanently. So I was living here in Norfolk, and I was waiting tables, cocktail waitressing, and I was adjuncting here at ODU. Pretty sure that Fred's too young to have actually been in my class. But I was going to, in my notes, I was saying, it was very much a commuter school at that point. And so I had really interesting relationships with a couple of students, one who was from Richmond, again, still remember them, and you just, you build these relationships with students that made a lot of difference to me. And I think helped influence where it is I wanted to go. So it's been a couple of lost years. I kept myself afloat financially by working in restaurants. And I will say, having a master's degree in English has served me well in the sense of you can always pick up an adjunct job teaching comp. There will always be a need for that. And so you're not going to make $1 million, but you can always keep yourself afloat. So that has been really interesting. Didn't tell the people in the restaurants that I had a master's degree in English. I found that didn't get me hired much. So, but so I was enjoying teaching, but what was really happening was that students would come in and want to talk. They'd bring in a paper and say that they wanted to talk about the paper, but they're all first-year students. Of course, this is comp. And what happened was that they would really want to talk about everything else that was going on in their lives. And I just started to really love those conversations. There was a difference that you could make that went beyond kind of grading. Grading was losing its shine. If it ever had one. And so I was just really enjoying the interactions that I was having with students. And so I decided for the once in my life, I made an intentional shift. And I realized that I could go get a master's degree in a field that would help me work with students more. So I applied to graduate school again. I got into Bowling Green State University in their college student personnel program. And I loved that program. That was an incredibly intentional program where you don't get admitted unless you also pair with an assistantship, because they really want to focus. They want you to take what you're learning in the classroom and be able to apply it for the entire 2 years that you're there. And you also had little internships along the way too. But so you had a big one, and then you would have smaller experiences. And that was an incredibly valuable program because, as I think all of us have said, you get experience in one thing that you don't think is going to be like your big next step, but it becomes really valuable in where you end up going. And so those were really, really good experiences. My main assistantship was, I just have to share this, it did not impact my experience, but I was a house director in a fraternity house for 2 years. So I lived with 12 fraternity men for 2 years. There were so many skills that program taught me, though. It taught me what I liked and what I didn't like. And during that time, maybe because I was living with 12 fraternity men, started to feel myself lean a little bit more to the academic side rather than the student affairs side. Many of us start in housing. If you come a traditional student affairs route, you start in housing. Housing will get you anywhere, but it is hard. I stayed at Bowling Green for a year after I graduated because I had the opportunity to work with faculty in developing a living learning community, which was an amazing experience. But I was about to turn 30 and I was living with 150 first-year students. So there comes a time when you sort of say, I need to move on to something else. That degree, however, was pivotal to getting my first full-time job, really. Just the one I had the living learning community job. And then after that, I went to work at the University of South Carolina, through Clemson again. And that was my first non-housing job, or it was a housing job, but I was not living in. And again, it was great. I was working as an assessment and training coordinator in the Office of Residence Life. So we were training RAs, but I was also in charge of the entire assessment program, which, as Remica, pointed out, will also get you a lot of places. After about 3 years in housing, I decided it was time to pull the trigger, and I did apply and was hired into a job as an assessment coordinator in our Office of Institutional Research and Assessment. So at that point, I made the flip from being in the student affairs side of the house to the academic side of the house. I found I was actually much more comfortable in that space, and I do find that it's a completely different environment, but the skills that I've learned in that, again, probably make me part of that higher education nerd of what you learn to really enjoy. One of the benefits of being in higher education is certainly not the high pay, but it's the tuition assistance program. And my mentor in the Office of Institutional Research was teaching a class on assessment, a graduate level class. And so I just decided I would take it, even though I was fairly new to the assessment field. I wanted to learn more. And I think that's again what I wish it happened as happenstance. I wish I'd been more intentional about it. but there are opportunities that often happen and get put in front of you to kind of learn that you've got different opportunities. So I started working on my PhD in ed psych and research. And that was a great experience. I can't say I had mentors in that program. It was just a great program where I learned a lot in skill set that helped me in my work. I realize I'm running low on time, so I want to keep moving here. After I didn't finish my PhD. I did the worst thing that you can absolutely do. I finished my coursework, I passed comps, and then I took a new job and moved out of state. Not recommended if you actually want to finish your PhD. Even if you don't think you're going to go into a faculty field, a PhD is very useful, but I was sitting APD. I took a bigger job. I became the director of assessment somewhere down here in the Southeast. And within a couple of months, the director of IR left. And so I assumed that role. And again, that's kind of this running theme for me, is that opportunity presents itself and you just have to be ready to take it. And I think that those can be really good skills. My next move after that was actually one I didn't think I was qualified for. My now husband, saw an ad in the paper that was for basically a data analyst in distance learning. And while I thought I could do data analyst, I was like, I know nothing about distance learning here at ODU. And however, what I didn't know at the time, and this is, again, never count yourself out. What I didn't know at the time was that the office was rebuilding itself. And what they were looking for really, yes, was a data analyst, but was also somebody who could do a lot of other things. And my experiences gave them the breadth and depth that they needed. And so I got myself into that role. I did SACS accreditation. I've done data stuff, survey development, program assessment, all through these different roles. I did eventually finish my dissertation. That was hard, but it hasn't been a straight line. And I've been at ODU now, as I said, for 14 years, and my titles have evolved based upon what the institution has needed, which I think you'll find is something very common that happens. If you're willing to step up, and when a vice provost says, "Would you?" or when somebody else says, "Have you considered?" there are lots of opportunities out there. And so I think that's where I'll wrap up, is that I wish I'd been more intentional, but I feel very comfortable with where I've gotten. But it's a matter of being open to opportunity and being willing to say yes when that opportunity presents itself.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing, what seems to students, maybe not necessarily intentional in some cases, but taking advantage of opportunities as they arise, but also not underestimating the skill sets that you have that might not necessarily translate from a degree in oceanography, for example, to working with a medical school integration. So I think those are really important insights from that conversation. So I'm going to ask our panel to consider 2 questions, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience. But first is, what particular skills, knowledge, or experiences from your graduate education, since we're talking to an audience of graduate students, has been especially helpful throughout your career path? And Susan, we're going to actually start with you, and then we'll go to Remica, Liz, and Fred.
I'll be just a kind of a generic answer, but I think the most important skill I learned through my graduate education was critical thinking skills. It can just be applied in so many different situations. Once you've learned how to think, you'll be able to do almost anything.
All right. Remica. And you can say English skills as well.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Susan hit the nail on the head. I just had 3 things kind of jotted down for this, but really the first one was just focus on the larger skills you're building. And in that larger skill set is critical thinking. So don't just get bogged down in the disciplinary knowledge that you're building from the degree, but on the skills that it's taking you to get there. Remember, when Fred got pulled aside by that mentor to start thinking like a scholar, that's kind of, what, what we meant. And then really, this is small, but seriously, no matter what your next step is, go where the money is. You don't want to have debt. If you got a wonderful assistantship that comes along with your degree, if you have a match program, go where the money is. You don't want debt following you around along with all of this knowledge that might keep you from taking another opportunity.
All right, Liz?
Yeah, that's a point that I was thinking of making to Remica. I feel like nobody, well, not nobody. I feel like you shouldn't have to pay for your graduate degree. However, you might need to make some adjustments in order to get that assistantship. But I totally agree that it's best not to come out with debt. I also feel like my background in data and understanding data and how to work with it and interpret it was really key. And then writing, definitely, yeah. I mean, being able to write is kind of the key to everything, I think. If you can think critically, got to be able to get it down. So,
All right, Fred.
I'd just add a few quick things. I think, especially if you are in the helping profession and working with direct student support, those sort of pieces, I think it's important to know how to advocate for yourself as well, right? Finding your voice as a graduate student can be really challenging because you are a paraprofessional in some ways, but you're also still a student, which means that you still have access to all the resources that are available. So continue to start to find your voice as you navigate that space. I would also say that voice is really important and visibility is important. Higher education are complex enterprises where oftentimes at large public research universities, we can be in silos. The thing that really helped me throughout graduate school, as well as many different points in my career, was being visible, right? A lot of many of you all have great competencies in many areas, but the visibility of those help that not just live in a silo, but recognize that it's connecting to strategic priorities across the institution. And then the last thing I just want to elevate what Remica said too, know your worth, right? I have left an institution because of failed negotiations or false promises, that sort of piece. So going back to finding your voice and advocating for yourself, having that backup plan on when you want to transition, I think is really key.
So I heard some really interesting insights there, but I would also, I think, suggest that what sometimes kind of in line with some of these comments, and a lot of times when we think about as graduate students and we're putting that resume together, or putting that CV together for that next job, we kind of also, I think, assume that people know what you do on a regular basis. And so really thinking about what is it that I'm getting out of this graduate degree? What is it that I'm getting out of this extracurricular activities that I'm doing? And how does that translate into something that people will value? I've seen so many resumes where it says, I taught political science 100 without having that student think, well, when you're teaching a class, you have to do, it's almost like project management. Right? There's a lot of time management that goes into it. There's a lot of content development, but then that gets summarized into I taught political science 100 when there's so many skills associated with that you can convey better to someone who's looking at your resume. In the spirit of staying on time, so this is a question to kind of reflect a little bit more. If you were to give advice to your graduate school self, whether that's at the beginning of your graduate school career or as you're starting to think more intentionally about what life looks like beyond graduate school, as you embark on that postgraduate school kind of journey, what advice would you give yourself? And Liz, I'm going to let you start.
So I alluded to this, that I think maybe I just wasn't a great match for me. The combination of the advisor, the project, the school was great, the program was great, and there were there were other faculty I probably could have worked with, but I did not feel empowered to go around and say, look, it's not working for me. Can I talk to you about a project? Can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? What can I do to get this to be a better fit for me? I just did not. I wish I had done that.
And I think that goes back to a little bit to the point that Fred had made about self-advocacy, right?
Self-advocacy. Yes. Yeah.
All right, well, Fred, let's lean into that. What advice would you have?
Yeah, I think knowing your values, starting to determine that voice. I'll share during my time at Clemson, I was there during a big height of student activism and really the years leading up to the Black Lives Matter movement. And then when I was at VCU, I was there during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement as well as the pandemic, the pandemic. So I say that to say that the beauty about being in graduate education is that you are in a space where you have your learning laboratory around you. And for me as a graduate student, if you're considering higher education, I saw how my leaders responded to those pieces as well. And so when you think about, if you're thinking about if you're looking at a career in student affairs on student advocacy, thinking about your own voice between activism and advocacy. Many of us are in positions of privilege. And so recognizing like, how do we continue to amplify student voice in the different spaces we are? That starts with belonging, that starts with equity, and then really ensuring that students are on their way to be successful. And recognize that institutions have different missions, right? Like public research looks different than private liberal arts. And so there's so many different avenues for that work. But just as you negotiate your priorities as an individual, as an employee in higher education in a non-teaching role, you're going to have to negotiate those as well.
Okay, and Susan, what about you?
So I think I would want to give myself two pieces of advice. The first would be to take some of the pressure off myself. I think I felt a great deal of pressure to make the right decision. And what I wish I leaned more into is make the right decision for now, assess how that goes, and adjust and pivot and be open. But I really felt I spent, a number of years just feeling like a failure when things didn't go the way I thought they should. So I think, I think I wish I'd been more open to opportunities and realized that that was not a bad thing. And related, the other piece of advice I wish I'd given myself was just not to take myself so seriously, at the end of the day.
I completely agree with that piece of advice, because I think as someone who, so I did my undergraduate work in engineering, realized that I was not cut out to be an engineer, transitioned to, and then getting my MBA while working, supporting a nonprofit and working with entrepreneurs. And then, as life happens, my husband got a job in a different state and we did not want to be separated. So I applied to one graduate program and got in. But it was just kind of those incremental steps that just make sense at the time. They might not necessarily feel like the pieces of the puzzle are coming together, but that's what's gotten me to today, the job that I love. So I think, giving ourselves grace and saying it's not going to be perfect, it's not always going to be the right thing at the right time, but how do you pull all of the different pieces together to make it more coherent? Maybe it's the next job, or maybe it's the next organization. So thank you for that. And Remica.
Yeah, I mean, just building on that, giving ourselves grace is really important. What I had was just be flexible, like be open to opportunities that might seem adjacent to your degree and not kind of head on, not exactly where you imagine, but things that, you might have been able to score because of having those critical thinking skills and really articulating the skills that you develop, not just kind of this small pigeonhole one thing that you've been able to do. And then the other thing that I would say to myself and to anyone in grad school is, no matter how isolated it may seem, there's always, those folks. So build your community. You will need those people for the rest of your life. I still have mentors and my dearest friends from, graduate school programs 20, 30 years ago. So really and truly build on those folks, build your community yourself, the people who understand your voice and your goals. Those are the people you keep around you.
Thank you so much for all of those pieces of advice. I do want to kind of open it. We have some students in the audience. If you have any questions, you can type your questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself to ask your own questions. So while we do that, I think Liz, while we let the students kind of think of their questions, Liz, I think you said you had a question for Fred, so you can put Fred on the spot now.
Well, I just wanted to know the topic of your doctoral research.
Yes, yeah, my dissertation and practice was on sophomore student success models.
Okay.
So really looking at, high support in the first year, but sophomores, redheaded stepchild of higher education or undergraduate education. So, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
All right, so Janae,
Great.
I think go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you everybody for sharing all your insights on your experiences and journeys throughout higher ed. My name is Janai. I graduated from Norfolk State University last year with a business degree, and I recently admitted into ODU's secondary education with a concentration in instructional design program. Yeah, that's a mouthword. But currently I am a career and work-based learning advisor at my local community college. Oh, it's okay. And I guess my main question is, what advice do you have for someone who wants to stay in higher ed, but also realizes that instructional design is very specific? It may not be there may not be a big job market for that in higher ed. I want to keep my options open, but also leverage the degree. So does anybody have any advice on that?
Any advice from our panelists? Susan?
I was just going to say, that's not really advice, but from where I sit currently, we have a high need for master's level instructional designers growing our online program. So again, I don't sell us out yet. I think there definitely is a market for people. Many institutions are not going the way of external course development, and that's not something that ODU ever wants to do. We have experts in house, and so it is something that we would value. So I do believe there will be a market there for you.
And Janai, I'll also just add that, I would say that's invaluable, right? In many spaces, academic affairs, student affairs, if we're all trying to level up, at ODU, we're very fortunate to have a very strong online learning division, right? But many institutions don't always have that. And so if we're trying to level up on the digital and online experience, even on the co-curricular side, I think if you're looking at training and development and trying to figure out how to create engaging e-learning modules, some of those different pieces, I think the instructional design work is really something that will help level up institutions in the future. I'm sorry, Remica.
No, I'm piggybacking on everything Susan and Fred have just said, and I think they've given you the basis for what I was gonna say, Janai. Sometimes we get pigeonholed by the diction, by the language. We're only looking for things that are in instructional design, but you just heard all those keywords that Susan and Fred just kind of ran down for you. E-learning, co-curricular design, thinking about online and distance education, instruction and faculty development, et cetera, et cetera. So if you start looking for the keywords, the key terms that might link to your skill set and not just looking for instructional design, I think you'll find that the scope for us needing those skills that you developed is much wider than you think.
I would add even thinking about student success, right? Student support, because these are the skills that don't just support faculty and students in the classroom, but much, much more broadly. So I definitely think, as our panelists suggested, how widely can you apply the skills, still thinking about what about the knowledge that you've developed through your graduate program, still applying it maybe just in a little bit different context, but still leveraging all of that really important skills that you have. Thank you, panelists, for that really kind of thoughtful response to her comments. I saw you unmuted, so if you have a follow-up question, please feel free to ask.
I actually do. And it's a little bit unrelated to the first question I asked, but you guys did mention building critical thinking skills. And so my question was, do you have any tips for someone who is trying to build their critical thinking skills in a world with AI and tools that don't really require us to use them as much?
Janai, you're our dream student right now. I just want you to know that. We're all like, oh, we've done well. Thank goodness she's here with us. Listen, the fact that you're thinking about that is kind of, half of the battle there. But also, I do a lot of workshops at the university because my area is critical writing and critical reading, critical thinking about AI and otherwise. And I think sometimes we're thinking about it a little bit wrong, whereas our students are thinking about it a little bit smarter. So I think, AI isn't going to steal all of our jobs, but the people who know how to use it and use it well are probably going to be the people who take our jobs. And so even if you're thinking critically about how to use AI, meaning, if you're looking, using it, many students are using it as a kind of reading and translation tool to begin, right? Getting bodies of knowledge or kind of helping to adapt. I think that's okay. I also think the more you read, the better you will be at almost everything you can imagine. So read as widely as you possibly can. And then also, someone else already did my part for me. But the more you are thinking about writing and communicating a clear narrative to folks, no matter what it is, whether that's on your resume, whether that's as research, when you're writing for grants, those are kind of going to be the skills, the muscles that you need to build to be the best critical thinker.
Thank you, Remica. And unfortunately, I have to say we are at time. So I do want to thank our panelists so much for first of all for being here, and then for sharing your experiences, offering insights and advice for the future. And thank you to the students for joining us today. I hope everybody has a great day.